Hello, and welcome to a basic Java tutorial on case statements. In this episode, you're going to learn about the case statement, the switch statement, and how they work together to control code in a very specific way. You will learn that a switch statement will allow you to select between different cases that you have defined, optional blocks of code. And you'll also learn about the syntax, what goes into a switch statement, what data types can be used in a switch statement, and the use of the word break inside the case statements that can control when your code will stop or if it will continue to essentially fall down a chain of commands. And we'll get into this so that you can understand more specifically what I'm talking about.
In Java, this is a functional statement that allows the movement of control based on a different special type of condition. So we call it a case statement, but it uses two keywords generally, which one is switch and the other is case. I have written a basic class that defines a simple example called cases. And I have one public static void main method. It has a test value which I have set to 6, and it is an integer, note that. And then I use this switch statement that I'm talking about. The syntax for using this switch statement is using the word switch and then in parentheses entering the value that you want to test for your switch. And you can note what I'm trying to do within this block. So a switch block does have the curly braces around it. There's no semicolon required at the end of it. And it has a series of case statements. At the end, a different one that we'll talk about in a moment. It has case 1, 1 being a value. So this is explained in English as saying we're testing the value that's passed in. If it is 1, then we want to print this out. Value is 1. And then the next, case 3. If it is 3, print the value 3. If it is 6, print the value 6. And then default. It says it hit the default option. Now, you can imagine a situation where default would be used. So if I passed in a value that was not of the value 1, 3, or 6, this other one would be caught. And so note that that is what is run by default in the switch statement. So you can see these things and see that I'm passing in 6. We'll go ahead and compile this one. And run it. And it says the value is 6. And it hit the default option too. So that's interesting. It hit the default. One thing to note is that if you don't have a break or an end in execution, the switch statement will fall down through the different case statements. I'll explain that, or show you a better example of that, if I move this case 6 up 1. And I move it after the 1, and so following that case 6 will be a case 3, and then the default. So now, if I compile this again, and I run it, now you see value is 6, value is 3, and I hit the default option. Interesting. This is because we do not have any sort of execution end when this occurs. In order to do that, you have to put in here the word break. This will tell the switch statement, once you've reached this case, go ahead and break out of this conditional because we've already found what we're looking for. The logic built into the switch statement is flexible, so that if you wanted it to possibly go down to the next option too, you could do that if you did not put a break statement in there. There's no reason to put a break statement on the last one because there's nothing else that it can do. So the only thing it has to do is end. So if I put these break statements in here and then run it again, Now you see that the value is 6, and it does not print the default, and this does not print 3, it only prints 6. So that's very important to recognize. Why don't we go ahead and change this value to something that we have not specified. I'll change it to 5. Now, what would you expect to happen? I check for 1, 6, and 3. What would you expect to happen if I pass in a value of 5? It hits the default option. That's because we did not define a case statement for 5. Let's suppose I take out this default section. So now, what do you think would happen? There is no default method for it to go to, no default statement for it to go to, and I compile it. Nothing happens. There's nothing that it found in this, so it was basically a no-op, meaning that there was nothing done, nothing executed, nothing gained or discovered. One of the things that you might want to do is say, put that default statement in there, and you could say I found a number. Not in the set. And if you did that, that would at least identify that you have found something that was not specifically looked for, but it was, it did identify and go through the switch statement. So at least in your operation, you would be aware what it was doing. So another change that I'll make here is to pass in a different type of value to understand what switch can be used for. So let's say I enter in a character. Now we noted before that character represents a Unicode value, not really a whole number. But it still does work because it is numerically based. I can enter a byte, execute that, the same happened. Let's suppose, and I'll go ahead and change this back to 6 so we get a realistic value there. Let's suppose I put in short. And I compile it, and I execute it, and that did work. Value is 6. We already tried integer, so then I'll try a long. Oh look, possible loss of precision. It found a long, but it required an integer. That's because long is too large to use for a switch. You can imagine that integer is already quite large, but long is not valid for the switch statement. It just has too many values in it and would overload the use of this operation. So note that anything between the character or byte up to an integer can be used in the switch statement. What do you think would happen if we put in the Boolean? It already failed and said incompatible types. Found a Boolean, but it was expecting an int. So note that you have those basic numeric types, byte through int, that can be used for the switch statement, the basic use of using a break statement, using a default statement, and the basic syntax that you have a colon after the case statement, then you have the executable code with an optional break in between there. The switch statement is very powerful and can be used across many primitive types in Java, and it can definitely be your friend.
In this episode, we went over the case statement and switch statement in Java, and you learned about the syntax used, the different types used in a switch statement, and the use of the word break in case statements, the use of the default case, and what that means for a switch statement. And you will be asked to test your knowledge on this concept, you can look up the questions associated with this on the website under Java case statement. And there's also an assignment that will test your knowledge of using case statements and how you can utilize the default as well.